Hello, my name is Nicole Monk. I am with Creedence Energy Services. Most of you probably have not heard of us. We are an oil field services company based out of Williston, North Dakota. I live 15 minutes from Montana, an hour from Canada, so I am very, very far from home and very, very humid weather compared to where I am from. So specifically, I'm speaking on behalf of OLI, which is the very first automation that we were able to integrate into our company. We specifically work in, as you said, a very remote area. Automation is very difficult for us for the fact that connectivity is very inconsistent. We've had times where I've been areas where I haven't had signal for anywhere from 30 minutes to 3 hours on my drive. For the most part, AT&T and Verizon apparently do not care about us, and we accept that as a challenge. So, I said, we are an oilfield services company. There are close to a dozen different service companies that work for any operator just to help give production wells a longer life. So our specialty is production chemicals. A little known fact about the Bakken where I work is the water that we produce with our oil is 30% total dissolved solids. It is more salty than the sea. It is a very fun time to work at. I'm just kidding, it is atrocious. I always say I'll retire in Texas where it is a lot easier to work. So, because of that, there's a lot of science that goes into what we do, and specifically one of our main things is we do complete water analyses to determine the amount of scale that's going to form and eventually would solidify a well over time. Most wells, you could get like a year, but we do have some wells that the actual well will produce solids to the point that will solidify and shut off the well over the course of 30 days. Again, it is a very difficult area to work, which is why we exist. So, a little bit of overview by numbers. My company services 2,200 wells in the Bakken. Over the 5 years that our lab has existed, we've completed 18,000 complete water analyses, 5,600 of which were just last year. Now, OLI Studio 11 was one of the amazing softwares that we consistently used, but there was one minor downfall. I happen to be the fastest one for modeling in my company, as I've been with the software the longest, and it takes me 3 minutes per model. Now with the 5,600 that we did just last year, that equals 280 hours or 7 weeks that I need to be sitting behind a computer. Now, most people would say, 7 weeks, it's not a big deal. But out of the 110 employees that I support, there are 4 people on my technical team that support all of our assets. That means that the opportunity cost of somebody sitting behind a desk is astronomical, especially when talent in North Dakota is so slim. Now, for people such as our regular engineers, it's a little bit closer to 5 minutes. I will admit they're slightly slower than I am, and that would equal to 12 weeks in a year. Again, opportunity cost for an engineer sitting behind a desk, it's just unprecedented to the point that we just quit doing the complete water analyses and doing the scale modeling that we needed to be able to keep our assets moving. It pretty much was a choice of, do you turn a wrench in the field or do you sit behind a computer? And the answer is, we're almost always in the field. So, the problem. Our company, we double in size close to every year, which is nice, but originally when we started working with OLI, we were in a singular location. Every single engineer was located in Williston, North Dakota, so we had a single user license. Then we expanded. We now have teams in Minot and Dickinson, the 2 closest cities, which are 2 hours and 3 hours away. I said, there's not a lot of people that live out there, and I understand why Verizon is not very active. So, with having a single user license, that meant that anybody in the remote locations was required to request of the technical team or a local engineer to do the modeling for them. Now that meant, oh, you need something? Let me drop everything that I'm doing and get over to it. The answer was it never got done in the time frame they were looking for. And anybody that's working upstream will understand that the answer is, if I need it, it needed to be done yesterday. We're a very reactive and responsive area, so the time frame that we are working in is always very tight. Another thing is, most of you probably remember COVID. It was fun, happened in North Dakota too. So all of our people went to working from home. With a single user license, that meant that one person had to take on all of the modeling. That happened to be myself, which worked out all right. But when we came back to the office, I said, all right, engineers, you did it before, you can do it now. And they said, we don't remember. It's been a year and a half. I haven't used it. Held training classes, tried to get it back on, but they got so used to it not being a part of their daily routine that trying to squeeze it back into their schedule was impossible. And so it was, okay, well, do we attempt to reforce the issue and attempt to reintegrate that into their daily work-life schedule? Do we add more people to my team? What's the options? And luckily, the answer was the OLI Cloud API integration. Right at the time that we were coming back, OLI said, we can automate what you do. And I said, if you tell me I get more hours back in my day, I am here and I am ready for what you are offering. So between myself and our data systems manager, we came up with specifically a few key points. Automation, I said, is very limited for us. And so moving towards that point, we are very, very big skeptics. So the biggest thing was they had to meet a few key goals. We need to be able to pull in data in the already existing format. We'd spent thousands of dollars making our lab database. We were not going to be making any changes from there for the fact that it would just add more cost. We also wanted to make sure that this new automated system worked as well as the manual one that I was working with. If the data wasn't reproducible and wasn't as exact as the previous, we also didn't want it. Also, I said, we need a minimal human intervention. We are doing more with less as we keep expanding, which meant that we didn't have time for somebody to be sitting, and even if it only saved 50% time, it still probably wasn't worth it. We needed to have it that all of these scale models, for the most part, would just show up magically, which is what they now do, and also be able to use the output in our current data interpretation. Our company is minorly obsessed with Microsoft, so we just switched to Power BI. We were 100% Excel-based, if any of you can imagine what that world is like. So if it didn't work, we just were not there for it. So our final system was this data flow. So we have our lab database, which hosts 26 data points for every complete water analyses. From there, Jupyter is able to actually pull out the specified data, push it up into the OLI Cloud API. From there, all the scaling risks were generated, pushed back into Azure for storage, and then shown in Power BI. The total answer from that was a complete removal of manual scale modeling. Now, this is something that for the most part had never been done before. Every single software that most people use in the backend is complete manual intervention. There's always a scientist sitting behind a desk, typing in all of the values, and then pushing that out. Moving to this meant that when my engineers go to Houston, or they're at home sleeping in Montana, most of my people do not live very close to our office, it made it that there was no geographic restrictions. There was no midnight phone call saying, this customer needs this now. Instead, all they had to do was open the internet browser, because we were able to finally automate something that everyone had always seen as, well, this is the way it's been done. You have to manually type things in, and then you get an answer out. This massively freed up our engineering and technical resources, which, as I said, I have a total team of 110. There are only a dozen engineers, and there are only 4 of us on the technical side. So the computer skills of the company are medium, and the background in chemistry, there are only 2 of us. Another big thing that this brought up was the ability for massive projects. So our production chemicals division has existed for 5 years, which means I have 5 years worth of complete water analyses on these production assets. Now, what a lot of people don't always recognize is the production wells that we work on they're living. They change over time. My end user and my customers, it's not actually people that pay me. It's not the BPs. It's not the Oasis. Instead, it's the earth. This is a living organism that changes over time, and we've been working to try to figure out, not only based on geographic, what scales we're working with, but how that might potentially change as the well produces over time, for the fact that it will go from 1,000 barrels of water per day all the way down to 10, close to 30 years later. With this, we were able to look at large-scale data and be able to output hundreds of complete water analyses and do geographical location searching to figure out if there was scale risks that changed over time. Overall, the automation opened up doors we never expected to be able to do large data looks to see specifically answers that we never looked at before of, do you want to drill in this location? Are you sure that it's the best choice? Maybe you should drill over here. You might have decent oil production, but you won't have to use nearly the amount of chemical to keep your well running due to the scaling factors. A big thing for us is 50% of the scales that we're forming in North Dakota are radioactive, which means the moment that it forms, it's radioactive material. I will tell you right now that it's very expensive to get rid of. So overall, this was the very first piece of automation we were able to bring in. For us, automation is a very limiting factor. So even just automating small pieces of software to save a couple hours, which in the end, looking from a value perspective is only $15,000, but from an opportunity cost when we have such little talent, ended up opening up huge doors. I mean, as a current right now, when I flew in here, out of our 4 team members, 2 were in Midland, Texas on business development, and I was here, which meant 75% of our assets were other places, which meant anything that we can do to automate, even the little things, ends up saving us so much time and lets us bring in new ideas to customers on the potentials for changes and the potentials for where you would want to develop. Well, that is all that I have, and I'll look forward to your questions.